Welcome back to Sessions, a podcast about esports and the people who work within it. My name is Matt Demers, I'm your host. Today we are going to talk to Damian Estrada, who is a videographer who has worked for numerous teams such as Team Liquid, Team Curse, and Cloud9. Essentially, his start within esports came from doing just video work around interviews and eventually progressed into the signature style of documentaries that he's known for today. We talk about how his style has helped to raise the floor of video documentaries made by other people, self-comparison, and just the grind from starting out with nothing and eventually upgrading your skills and technology in order to create a better product. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Sessions is about the humans, not the handles. This episode was recorded on June the 22nd, 2016. Damien, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I just got finished up basically gutting a bunch of random boxes in my apartment and cleaned that up, so that was nice.
So I'm guessing you're just like coming back and like finishing E3 stuff, right?
Yeah, well, so I moved into this apartment, I don't know, maybe like 3 or 4 months ago, and I felt like I never actually moved in because we were so busy. So finally I got to like sit down. Everyone's in, or half of my team is in London, or the good chunk of them, and then we have another 2 that are out in Jersey shooting something for Poker Stars. And I kind of suffered a wrist injury, so I can't really shoot, and I've only been able to direct stuff recently. So I got to sit at home and just kind of edit for this event, and like be, the watchtower sort of character.
Definitely.
And that allowed me to also clean my house at the same time.
So it's almost just like you were forced to slow down for once.
Yeah, it was good. I got to, I helped everyone pack yesterday and the day before. I was helping everyone pack, getting all the cameras sorted, which is really interesting because normally it's me that has to figure out where everything goes and how it goes and what it fits in. So it was a cool team effort that I've had help before for sure, but not to the extent of like, please remember where everything is,
Yeah.
So that was interesting.
Is it weird kind of having to give away some of that power, especially like if you're in a position where like you can't, like, you can't be there. So it's in their hands and you're like, oh my God, I wouldn't say freaking out, but it's like, it's something that you usually take care of that you now have to like pass over to someone else.
I would say probably like 2 or 3 months ago, I would have definitely been more worried. But now that the team has like a couple projects under their belt, right? So we have the MLG Major, which was like one of our first times like ever going out and really committing to a lot of stuff for someone. Then we had MLG Anaheim. And then obviously we've done Rivals, who I worked with Michael, who's directing a lot of the stuff out at, they're doing Face It for CSGO, the finals right now. So I felt confident that like Michael could kind of take the directing role for that, since we all kind of pitched in at the MLG Major. We had a outside director that I'd worked with before that came in, and we kind of like all learned from him. Then in Anaheim, I directed some of it, and one of our editors, Ian, directed some of it, and Michael kind of interviewed a lot of people since he gained a lot of experience with Rebirth. And so now Michael's kind of directing and leading Face It right now with Mike Milanoff, one of the other guys who's producing.
So that's a lot of, well, that's like kind of a lot of names and faces to remember, I guess. But
yeah.
So I guess a better way of kind of tackling that question is like, how about you just kind of give us like a synopsis of maybe like your last year or two, because when we met at Season 3 Worlds for League of Legends, and that was 2013, and then we ended up working together. Kind of like we were on the same team, but I don't really. Besides me giving you guys some interview questions, I think once or twice, we didn't exactly like work directly together at Azubu. But then since then, it's like since Azubu, you've kind of gone through a couple different teams, a couple different environments, and now you're kind of arriving here at 1UP. So maybe kind of just give us a synopsis of that.
Sure. So do you want me to go like how I got into esports?
Oh yeah, that too. That's always a really good question to start with.
So a couple of my friends were working at Leaguepedia doing like social media and or like helping out with their interviews. And this is in a time where it was just like Travis was king of post-game interviews. I mean, not that he isn't now, right? But when there was really like no one else
doing it,
to be honest. I think Julian Collins was doing him every now and then, and Leaguepedia had this guy Ron Adu. That was
I remember that being like, I remember his name coming up at least once.
Yeah, so they were the competing interviewers, against Travis, and their production quality was like not very stellar. So I was like, hey, let me help you guys out, right? And at the time, I like totally hated League of Legends. I was like a Dota fan, 100%.
Yeah, I remember this.
But I was like, maybe this like step into esports might be like a good use of my time. I was working full time at a not production company. I was working full time at a web development company, so doing like graphic design and user interface stuff. So totally not really what I do now at all. And this is just kind of like my weekends that I sacrificed or like just kind of volunteered. And it wasn't that bad. It was only like half a day, maybe if the day went long, 6 to 8 hours max. But I felt like I was learning a lot and I was like getting to know people. So I just like came in. It was actually pretty rough for like the first 2 or 3 months. I had like error after error where it was like, okay, cool. Like I have the better camera. I like have a decent lens. I know how to use a camera. Let's shoot. And then it was like, all right, the audio is bad. So then it was like, okay, fix the audio issue. And then it was like, all right, everything's good except the quality doesn't look that good. So then it was like, all right, buy a new lens for the camera that like fits the space, right? Because it was really particular. So got a new lens. Cool. Then I started having weird audio errors again because we like upgraded our mics so they weren't like little shitty ones. So then I had to go through this process where like a week and a half of interviews were bad until I got like a new adapter for my mic.
I hate when that happens where you're just like waiting on the upgrade cycle pretty much.
Yep. So got the update and then it was like coasting from there. Then like I figured it out. I like ironed out the patches and then like season 3 Worlds came around and that's where we met, right? And we didn't really have any sort of direction outside of like grab as many interviews as you can. But as you know, being someone that creates content in the esports industry at a world event that a lot's on the line, it's super hard to get anyone to like walk away from scrims or team time or even personal clearing your head time to like sit down and do an
especially
interview
after anyone. After a loss, it's just like, okay, well, I guess we're not talking to them.
Yep, exactly. So it was sparse to say the least. And the guy that was interviewing for Leaguepedia, Julian Collins, who works at Jinx now, he was also transitioning into the role of being the manager for XTG. So I just kind of ran around. That was
Vulcan at the time.
Yeah. Right. Vulcan, whatever they
were called,
becoming, right? So I just kind of ran around and experimented with a bunch of different content. Shot a bunch of really risky shots, like shot interviews at like super shallow depth of field, just because it looked like really pretty to me at the time. And honestly, still I like that stuff now. But that's kind of where like I started developing my style. I noticed that when like I look back on that footage, probably like 4 or 5 months ago, and I remember just thinking like, why, like my camera movements were so weird and foreign to me. Like that's like a lot of the stuff that I was doing was stuff that I hate. And I remember it's because like one of the directives that I got was like, yeah, it should feel like MTV style, like venue tour thing. And looking back on it, it's like that was not me at all. And it's good to see that like I was still trying to experiment and do things that were like risky back then, that were like against the grain. I'm definitely someone that fully believes like if you have a pretty good solid creative idea, like obviously do what the client or what your boss or whoever it may be is asking, but then also take the extra time to like make sure to try and invent something that you like if it's not the product that they're asking for. Obviously if time permits, you never want to like screw over anyone with that kind of thing. But yeah, so that was my like time at Leaguepedia. I don't know if this is too long.
No, dude, don't worry. This is part of the great part of the story is that people get to experience the kind of start to finish.
Yeah, that's true. So then from Leaguepedia, there was like half the staff left to Azubu, and I was part of that staff that went over to Azubu.
This is when the magic starts happening. This is when the magic like we talked about this I think on Twitter a couple of weeks ago when we were reminiscing about that Azubu kind of lineup and the amount of people that were there that have now gone on to do other things in terms of Twitch, in terms of team organization, in terms of video. It just like you look back on it and you're like, holy crap, like everyone was under one roof and just kind of like growing at the same time.
Yep. And so that time was super interesting. I remember coming into it, they had already had a video producer. So it was like very odd because it's like, oh my God, am I going to be like, bottom of the barrel, like trying to ask permission before everything I do? Or is it going to be like a fluid environment where we work together? Ultimately, it ended up being a relatively fluid environment. The only person in my apartment when I came in was Vital, Mike Vital, who now works for Cloud9 as their video director. But so like it was the duo of me and him for like a really long time. And it was honestly just like we just experimented with a lot of weird stuff. Like I remember because Azubu was all about like, like pushing towards the Korea stuff and like looking at all that. And so like I had never really seen the OGN intros before then. And we started like just playing around with like the lighting equipment that we had got and like the 5Ds that we had just picked up because we were going to start doing content, right? And like doing these like really horrible OGN style, but like horrible, but in a cool, like horrible way.
Okay.
For like one of the like marketing guys and then the editor, or sorry, what was Darren's title?
I don't really remember. I'm not going to lie. I wanted to say he was like my editor. I want to say he was like editor in chief maybe or something like that. I'm not sure.
For two of the people that worked there, we made these like OGN style intro things. And it was really interesting because it was like I was pulling assets from stuff that was like in-game audio and then like pulling stuff from cinematics to like try to blend it together and make it feel League of Legends-y or League of Legends themed.
Yeah.
And like there was a lot of stuff that I was learning from Vital where like Vital had a bunch of like different sound packs and like different like lens flare effects and whatnot that I don't know if we fully integrated a lot of that stuff, but I definitely remember.
But just a lot of tools in the toolbox that you suddenly get to experiment with.
Exactly. So it was like taking two, I think Vital and I were very different at the time, and taking two completely different styles and sort of like throwing them at a wall and figuring out what was cool. And so that was like, I think a pretty important time of like figuring out how to work with someone and like grow with them as a team.
So what was it kind of like working, I want to say, I don't want to say like a partnership or something like that, but like working really closely with someone who their style might not mesh with yours immediately? Like how do you guys kind of learn from each other or just like take elements of like how each other work?
I honestly think a lot of that has to do with the people involved, right? So I remember coming in, I was pretty defensive of like, I have a vision that I could do this really good narrative stuff. And Vital like did some really awesome montage editing, and like his editing style was like pretty flashy from the stuff that I remember seeing in the beginning. And I was like, this just doesn't fit what I'm gonna do. Like this is gonna be really awkward. And I like entered in with like a negative attitude for sure. And I just had to like get over it, right? Because my situation wasn't gonna randomly change. But it definitely took a while, and it was like part of, I guess, growing up. Of like, I don't have control of the situation, but I need to make the best out of it that I can.
It's
right?
a humility. It's a humility thing. Like you were saying, like you can't kind of screw over what the client wants. You kind of have to like work within your what the project calls for, but still find ways in order to make it fulfilling for yourself. Yep,
exactly. And so like everything that we did was kind of like I wanted it one way, he wanted it another way. I think maybe once or twice we clashed heads and ultimately had to get someone else to tell us what way it was going to be. But I think towards, like a month or two into it, like we started understanding like, okay, maybe like Vital will take direction on this and then I'll take direction on the next one. And it kind of relates to what we were talking about at the beginning where it's like, how do you hand over a big project like that? Well, I had to start learning that when I first got my full-time job in eSports, to where it was like, okay, like this one just isn't my vision. it's, maybe it's not even either of our visions. Like maybe it's not the creative's vision. Maybe it's like marketing team's vision, and we just have to like figure out how to make it. Like, so how do we take what they want but make it like better than what they want, or maybe do it exactly how they want to do it but in like a different light or with a different tone that might make more sense. And so there was a lot of learning and like how to compromise for sure during that time.
And I think that's kind of like a weird thing that a lot of esports people have to kind of, or just gaming people in general, when they transition from like a self-made project. Like imagine if you are like doing your own interviews like just by yourself or something like that, and then all of a sudden you do get hired or partnered or decide to take it, or like you get like outside money or something like that. All of a sudden you have to not only stay true to your own vision or like what you want, but more of like you have to kind of work to other people's needs and wants and kind of like fulfill those as well.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely I think that goes very well with like the next step of Azubu, right? So we're at Azubu, we're doing all this random stuff, we're like going to LCS. We ended up picking up Brittany Brown, and she had just like come off filling in for Travis
GameSpot,
for LCS, and she started doing interviews. And we had tried like one or two little kind of more interesting like sit down interviews, right, with like her and the other person in it, with like higher production value, like 2 or 3 cameras. At the time, I would argue that we were like one of the few people, at least in NALCS, that were trying to do that wasn't Riot.
I remember Evo was a big thing for that as well. Like we both went to, I think, Evo 2014, and I think I had left Azubu by that point. But you guys were there doing a lot of the Smasher interviews, and I think I remember a lot of, I think like Hungrybox and PPMD and Pew Pew and that kind of stuff, where it was, relatively, it was a sit down interview, but it did have that high kind of production value.
Mm-hmm. And those are so funny, like calling those high production value in comparison to the stuff that's going on now is like laughable, right? Like I watched this E-League interview with last week I saw one with like Richard Lewis. This week specifically I was watching one with Thorin, and it was like on a really awesome stage, like lit beautifully, like 3 camera angles, tons of B-roll, right? Like all the stuff that I wanted to do back then. But the reality is we were standing in a hallway,
or on seats Evo or something like that. I remember.
Yeah, it was like we're standing in a hallway in Evo interviewing Mango because he's like, yeah, meet me, like I'm on my way to my room, right? And we're like standing there with like one camera on a tripod locked off and the other one trying to like move between the 2 people to like simulate a third camera. I don't know if we actually achieved it, I don't remember, but it was like from that like guerrilla, like holy shit, we just have to get that whenever we can. And honestly still a lot of stuff is like that, but it was like transitioning from that was super interesting.
I remember you said on Twitter that there was like a salesperson or something that told you that like the narrative kind of style that I would imagine, well, I'd like to think that you kind of pioneered that anyway, or at least that is like what kind of kicked people's attention towards doing that kind of stuff in esports. They said it basically wasn't viable, so it's kind of like, it's an interesting, when you told me that on Twitter, I was like, oh man, that's just a really interesting thing.
So after we started doing the interview stuff, right, with Brittany, we're doing stuff at LCS, and it feels super repetitive, and I feel like I'm getting like caged in, right? Like, oh my God, I'm just a guy that hits record and monitors audio levels. So it's like, I have to do something else because I still have this vision. Like chasing the cup was a thing, and it like disappeared for a little while. And I think it was like coming back, but I was like, no, like this is cool, but like it's not as cool as it can be. And like, so I was like, I have to do something, right? Like, so I remember, and kind of how it all started, right? It was like I couldn't use my work days to go to LCS and do this because it wasn't a project that was being called for. So I had to just like, all right, I'm working Monday through Friday, and I'm going to take Saturday and Sunday off. And at the time, Curse was a team that we were following. I was like, I'm just going to go like hang out with Curse. Like I got permission from Steve, our handset, to like go and be in the green room with them and like shoot their interactions. And it's something that they're used to because they've had 2 or 3 or 4 videographers in the past that were recording everything. I think they were one of the teams, if maybe not the only team, to like do a 24-hour stream when they had one of their larger houses.
Yeah, I remember the house cam. Like they had a house cam going.
So it was kind of normal, like quote unquote normal for the players to have cameras around them. So I got lucky in that sense, right? That it was like relatively easy to work. with them. But I just had to like, okay, like I'm going to not have a Saturday and Sunday again, which is fine because I have a really good idea. And I just like went there and I shot a bunch of stuff. I had no idea what I was doing. So one thing that I like about myself that I find a lot of people don't like when they work with me is that I like to just like throw myself into a situation with no plan because I feel like I find stuff as I go.
Okay.
So like now that, you know, we're one up and we have clients and there's like deliverables and there's like, you know, KPIs, like you have to plan it. But a lot of the time I like to just like run into a situation with like a concept, like a super minimal concept. Like I shot Team Liquid's Overwatch team recently, right? And like the minimal concept that I have was like, it may or may not feel something like Rebirth, and it may or may not just be about the event, and it may or may not just be collecting footage because I like Overwatch right now. And that was the only concept that I had going into it. And like off of that, we made like this little video with like Ask Joshi where he talks about the event, and then we're gonna make a longer form piece, probably like 10 to 15 minutes, that just talks about the team and the players that are still on the team currently, because I think the roster shuffled a little bit. But that's what I like to do. I like to just like run in and see what happened. So I just ran in and I was like, maybe I'll try to go for that chasing the cup kind of style. And I think Vital even came out with me, so I wasn't like totally alone on it. And so we were both shooting, and then I just got all the footage, and so got all the footage, like started cutting it, and I remember like probably 4 hours into like sorting and like laying stuff on the timeline, I started to think like there's actually some really cool stuff here. Like I think there's maybe a viable product. And I started piecing things together, and it ended up being something like kind of felt interesting, kind of felt a little different than chasing the cup. I showed everyone, like everyone thought that it was pretty cool. And so I think we went out to like the Curse House that Monday to go and get interviews with the players so that we could have like a real backbone for everything, and to get like really short intro shots. And like we just kind of made it off that. Like the first episode was just that. Like I stood up for like 24 hours to get it done, and we released it, and it did like pretty well. So then the second one, I was like granted the time to go and shoot at LCS and not have to worry about like, oh, this is like my weekend, right? Yeah. And then the Monday and Tuesday I had off, so I was able to like edit then, because they still were like not sure if it was a good commitment at the time. So I still had to edit on my off time, but it was okay. So I cut it on my off time. Second episode came out, it did pretty well, got like a lot of really positive comments. And then the third and fourth episode, they were like totally on board. They were like, yeah, sure, like this is what you're doing right now, go for it. But it was still like a weird thing, right? Like what we were talking about, where it was like, yeah, this is awesome, but like what's the return on investment? Which I argue trying to find return on investment as a corporate company for a narrative piece about a team is extremely hard unless you have a huge sponsor backing it. So it was one of those things where it was like a 4-piece project that exists on the internet.
Yeah.
But it was definitely a really good learning experience of like, Vital and I shoot really differently, so it was awesome to see the different shots that he would think of that I never thought of at the time. Yeah. And then kind of bringing that in and having to build a product off of something that was shot by me, shot by someone else, with like I even want to say like Brittany contributed with like questions for the players, and so it was like a team effort that kind of built this thing.
So how did you kind of rewinding a little bit to like the initial like noticing that there was something possibly there, how do you kind of trust your intuition like in that moment?
I think for me it's always been about like I want to make something that I want to watch. So I'm not someone like, you could argue that if I put in all my time and I cut videos for Dyrus and I made some of the funniest videos that like I'd probably have like quadruple the followers. I'd be, TSM D2E2 and or Dyrus D2E2, right? Whatever the branding on that would be. And like people would send me 100 times the amount of thank you for making this awesome stuff. But like that's not the content that I like to watch. Like I'm not cutting videos for Dom, not because I don't like Dom, but just like streaming content isn't interesting, which is ultimately why I left Azubu, right?
Yeah.
They were like, so we can't really do this doc stuff unless we find a sponsor, which we probably won't because there's not really a market for that unless you're Machinima. So we're just going to do like highlights and sick plays. And it was like, that's not what drives me.
Yeah, it just kind of makes you want to swallow your own tongue.
Right. And so for me, it was like what drives me is like interesting stories about people that are real in the world.
Yeah, of course.
And that's always been something that's driven me since I had first attended film school. So I took what drove me and married it to eSports, and that's kind of how you arrived on Roads, which was a series that we just talked about, and then Rebirth, which came after that.
Yeah, and then eventually I think the transition is that you took Curse, who had become Liquid, and then you kind of became an in-house kind of videographer for them.
Right. So the relationship that I built with Steve Arhanset and the players at Curse while I was doing Roads made it really comfortable for me to transition from Zooboo to Curse / Team Liquid. I remember when I was coming over, it was just kind of like, yeah, we have like all these deliverables, like 7 to 12 videos a month that you have to do. And for me, it was like, okay, I could get all that out of the way, but I'll be with the team all the time. And maybe I could continue like a road style thing. Like maybe somewhere down the road, I could start like producing something like that again, right? So I just shot everything. Like all the work that I did in the first, I'd say like 2.5 months was just like Loot Crate unboxing videos or like vlogs or like stuff that's not very just sponsorship stuff, right? And it was cool. It was fun, like seeing the cool feedback and like working with the players and whatnot. But it wasn't like meaty,
Yeah, I get that feeling. Yeah, I get that feeling entirely.
But the entire time I was just like shooting. Like I would get there. I was only going in, I think, 3 or 4 days a week. But I would like drive up from Orange County to where they live, which is maybe like 30 to 45 minutes away. And I would just like start shooting from the moment I got there until the end of the day. Like I remember I was like editing something that had to come out the next day. And Joke is like, hey, we're going to go pick up our new mid laner. You're welcome to come, but I understand you have a project. And I remember being like, if I go with them, I'm going to be so behind. But the footage that I get could be good if the guy is like funny or like if the interactions are cool. And so I went with them, and that was like the footage that you see in the Rebirth episode where they pick up Phoenix, which for me, I think it was one of the best episodes that we ever made. And apparently for the audience, because they were commenting this all over Reddit last season, like that was one of their favorite episodes. So it was like little sacrifices, if you will call it a sacrifice.
Have there ever been any moments that you've missed?
Moments that I missed
where you didn't make the sacrifice. You were just like, okay, I'll pass on that, and then like something really cool happened that you missed.
So actually, this is a really interesting concept, and this is one of the things that I tell a lot of people that we shoot with, or people that I'm like training to follow a team or like that kind of filming, because it's honestly very different than shooting something that's scripted. Oh, yeah. There's two ways to think about it, right? There's you shoot everything, you're there all the time, you get it in the bank, you're good to go. Or you slow down for a minute, you like take your time, you shoot the best that you possibly can, like beautiful angles, like risky shots, but you know that you're going to nail them because you're taking the time to set it up. So it's more interesting than just a camera that's panning back and forth between two people, right? Like the proper lens. Like I don't know how many times I've missed the beginning of a conversation because I had to swap to a lens that I felt suited the situation better than something that I had to my camera prior to the conversation starting. But the thing that I remember I used to like rush super fast, and I remember multiple times like dropping stuff or like becoming a burden to the conversation. And so I had to start telling myself, like, I'll mentally go through this thing in my head where I'll just be like, okay, slow down. What you don't capture, no one will know that you missed. And it's like one of those things where it's like, even though something really sick or like super hypey or like really personal could have happened, if like the audience doesn't know that you missed it. But I used to beat myself up over it all the time. And ultimately it left a lot of situations like feel rushed, or like the footage was a little shaky because I didn't have the proper vantage point, or my angle was awkward because I was in the wrong place, or, you know, the lens was bad and it wasn't a low light lens. So then like it looked super grainy. So it was just a lot of those situations where I was just like, okay, I need to like stop, do the best to capture the best content with the best visuals. And like, that was the goal.
I get the feeling that any career that requires editing is really bad for perfectionists, because you just sit there and you're like, okay, well, even just down to the for me with audio or for me with video, it's like, okay, this could be even a frame earlier, and that would make it perfect, as opposed to, you know, just leaving it the way it is. And it kind of makes you go back and forth on these little tiny minute edits that like you might like, but then you might watch it later and be like, oh, well, what the hell was I thinking? And it's just like, you sometimes you just need to get over it and get it done.
Yeah. I mean, I think majority of filmmakers, you could say that you could work on the same project forever most of the time. It's like you'll always, for me, I'll always watch episode 13 back, which was the Madison Square Garden episode. Yeah. I remember when we released it, I was just like, holy shit, this is the best thing that I've ever made. Like, I'll never make anything better than this. And maybe that's true, I don't know. But I just remember thinking, like, this is so good. And then I watched it, like, 2 months after we released it. And then I was like, oh, my God, there's so many, like, holes. Like typography stuff that was, like, a little weird. Or, like, oh, we didn't do titles like the previous episode. Or, like, oh, we missed this, like, name card here. Or, oh, the music fade out could have happened sooner. And it's just like,
I don't think anyone notices. Like, that's the thing, is that no one notices that, because
right.
It's like there's this weird concept that I think I've become a lot more aware of in the last little while, where it's like you're consuming a video not necessarily to view the scenes from beginning to end, but it's more of the emotional wave that you ride while you're watching the video. And now that you mentioned that specific one, and if you're watching this or listening to this and you haven't already, you can check out, I think it's episode 13 of, sorry, what was the series called? I'm blanking on it. Rebirth season episode 13. It's actually really good. I remember that was one of the ones that actually like really stuck out with me, just because the narrative and just like the camera angles and just like getting the shots of people like walking. I remember just like them walking around with construction. I think Piglet was like playing on the scaffolding bars or something like that, or just even jumping up to touch them. But it's like, that's the type of stuff that just like sticks with you, because it like evokes a certain emotion right as you're watching it, and then you can kind of either not forget it or associate it with that, you know, that game or that time or that place that you were watching it.
Definitely. I think one of the things that I feel that we've done a really good job at perfecting is making everything in a story matter. So like for that episode, what I was really proud of, that Seth Achilleos, who was working with us at the time, Seth Achilleos King, who now casts in OGN, I remember we like went through and we were being like probably like way too pretentious about it, but I remember we were like having these conversations of like, yeah, this should feel like social networky, or like this should have like this tone, and like this music should come in and evoke this feeling. And it was like, maybe I should do that more, because I think that piece is pretty good. But like the shot that you're talking about of Piglet and Phoenix like walking through and like kind of showing their friendship, like pays off in the end after everything ends and they end up getting third. But it still like didn't necessarily feel good. And you have the voiceover of Vic Special talking about how like as they became friends where they weren't previously, like they started drifting away from the team. And like it pays back to that shot previously where it's like, why are they by themselves? Like, where's the rest of the team? And stuff like that, I think subconsciously happened in the edit, and I think towards the last final pass, I think I made a couple different tweaks to like perfect it. But I remember when I was watching it, it was like, oh shit, like that works so well. Like I didn't mean to do that, but like that accidentally like works out perfectly.
I love when that happens. It's like this serendipitous, just like, okay, well, I'll take that universe. Like, thanks for giving that to me.
Yeah, I'll take that win.
So it was as Rebirth kind of like gained in prominence. The funny thing that I started to notice was that other people started doing very similar-esque, like let's follow the team, let's get the behind the scenes footage, that kind of stuff. So what was your reaction to seeing like those extras, those like other shows come out?
So, I mean, one of the things that I have appreciated that I've been able to do with a lot of people that I've worked with is like raise the quality bar from where it was previously. And I don't think that that's something that's like exclusive to me. Like I'm not like I'm the only person in the industry that can do that, because like ESL's done that, Riot's like done that tremendously. Valve like just came out right with their stuff like out of nowhere and just crushed everything that had ever existed previously, in my opinion.
They kind of just like that's a really weird thing, especially with the TI interviews. It's like you don't hear from Valve at all through like social media or stuff they put out or whatever, and then all of a sudden they just like they just come out, they drop a whole bunch of stuff on you, and they're just like, okay, deal with it, and it's all like really good, it's all like really well planned, and they have that kind of connection emotionally with the narrative and that kind of stuff. Like all the little tiny ones that they did for the last TI was amazing, but it's just like I didn't know that they could do that. Like who are they getting to do that for them and that kind of stuff. So
exactly. I remember when free to play first came out, I was just like, I suck. Like my first thought was like, man, I thought I had something like really good. I think I was still at Azubu at that time. Yeah, because I remember like we watched it on the projector that we had, but I remember Vital and I were both, or I know especially me, I was just like, God, everything I've done has sucked up until this point. Like I need to get so much better. And so for me, I think a lot of what I've tried to do is like make everyone better, because I think a lot of people are okay with just the bare minimum. Like for example, and he'll hate me for saying this because he disagrees with me, like Travis's interviews were like pretty okay. He had like the same sort of format, same structure, and I kept like trolling him and like teasing him about like, hey everyone, it's Travis here on another exciting day, like week 3. Like week 3, day 2, I'm here with Double Lift from CLG, and I used to like just troll him, and I was like, dude, you don't have to do that. Like you could just open up without like they don't need to know the week and the day. And I had worked with Travis on like,
as I knock everything over, sorry, excuse me.
No worries. I had worked with Travis at Smite Worlds, and I noticed like some of the stuff that we did there was like really interesting, because he had never, to my knowledge, he had never really done any sort of like documentary content. And like I found a story while we were there. This is like another really good example of like me not coming prepared. Like we both just went there with no expectation. We were going to do like a couple Travis style interviews and maybe just get some footage and some photos for social. And like so the thing that we shot never came out because we never had time to cut it. But we had shot this player Barracuda and his team at Smite Worlds, and we were like in depth with the team, and we did like interviews with them, and Travis was behind the camera, not in front of it for once, like conducting the interviews. And I remember we were talking about it, and he's like, holy shit, like that was so cool to do. And it was like a really good learning experience, right? And like I think I've had a lot of moments like that where like I've worked with people that had not worked with me before, or had maybe not had the same sort of ideas, or not worked with other people outside of the group of people that they were working with. And like I learned stuff from them, they learned stuff from me. And so to like tie back to the question that you're asking, like how does it feel to see other people like take some of the stuff that we've done and sort of apply it to their show? Like that feels really good, because like for me, I don't think I'm a really good teacher at all. Like the people that I work with are probably like, yeah, he doesn't know how to explain shit. But I think if people could look at the stuff that I do and then like kind of adapt it and apply it to what they do, and then honestly like evolve it. Like I think Max from TSM has done a really good job of taking this show in what felt like a really different direction than Rebirth, even though like there were a lot of people that were trying to say that the shows were extremely similar or were the same thing. I think we both borrowed stuff from each other. And I think because of that, both of our shows became better, right? Because if there would have just been TSM Legends or just Rebirth, there would have been no competition to improve. And like now that Vital stepped in with his C9 show Genesis, and then obviously you have Fnatic show, and then G2, it's like a bunch of people are competing to have a better product. And so like in theory, a lot of shows gain momentum.
It raises
and
the floor.
Right. And so I like to think that a good amount of content that I've worked on has lent to that of hey, you can't just do a shitty interview. Like we've made 20 not shitty interviews. and now the guys at Fnatic are doing not shitty stuff, and now the guys at TSM are doing not shitty stuff. So it's like everyone sort of has to keep up.
Do you allow yourself to have a little bit of pride about that?
I definitely I think I've heard it enough to where I don't feel like I made it up. I think in the beginning, I had the thought once, and I was like, no, you're being super pretentious. Like, shut up. You didn't raise the quality bar. But then, like, a bunch of other people started telling me.
Yeah, man, I'm one of them. I'm very much an advocate of, hey, Damian, like, this is a Damian-style interview, or, like, a Damian-style piece. That was just something, like, part of the reason why I wanted to talk to you is there's that kind of feeling where you're looking at, like I said, the floor raising. And you're like, okay, well, who and which events inspired that kind of trend? And you kind of look at it, and it's just weird to be like, one guy, or not one guy, obviously you're working with a team and that kind of stuff, but one group's efforts has kind of influenced the entire thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's super interesting because coming into Overwatch, we've been talking about this a lot internally, where it's like, what is 1UP going to do for Overwatch? What is TL going to do for Overwatch? And for me, like, it's honestly the only game that I play now. I like get so much enjoyment out of it, and like working with a Team Liquid Overwatch team, like those dudes are so cool, and they were like so open with me that like I want to like go all in Overwatch. So like while my whole team's like out doing their thing, I have like a couple MLG pieces that I need to cut and like a little thing for TL that I need to cut. But then I'm just gonna like, wrapping it all back to the beginning, I'm just gonna devote a bunch of my own random time. Like everyone's out of town, my girlfriend's going out of town, so I'm literally just sitting at home for the next couple days. So I'm just gonna like dive in to what I shot at the Overwatch event and see what I come out on top with.
Do you ever run?
And
sorry, continue.
And optimistically, if what I create is good, then so far we will have set the trend of what narrative around Overwatch eSports will be. And it'll be really hard to enter in with like something that's not nearly as good as that. But not in like a pretentious way, in like I think this could be a really huge game, and it would be a mistake to make a bunch of flimsy content around it.
Especially when like I think that new esports or new games that are developing and trying to make their own esports, they take a lot from what games have come before them. Like I was trying to get a interview with one of the better Rocket League players, and one of the questions I wanted to ask him was like, what do you guys like, how do you see yourself dealing with the problems that other esports have? Because now you've seen how they've handled it, and it's like, how do you think Rocket League will handle it? And like you're saying, it's kind of just like if you've seen people make the kind of mistakes in like earlier League of Legends stuff or other interviews, or just like even I bet E-League like went and watched old CGS episodes and were just like, okay, what are the mistakes that they made here? How could we make it better? That kind of stuff. So that's always like a good thing. Do you ever kind of changing gears a little bit, do you ever kind of look at other people's stuff? Do you ever get bit by the whole like self-comparison bug?
Definitely. Like, I remember one of the things that, so like kind of going back to like the TSM Legends Rebirth thing, I remember feeling like, man, we have like pretty good stories. I'm allowed to be like extremely honest with the team, which I would argue TSM Legends wasn't 100% transparent with what was going on for good reasons. But I just remember feeling like, at a point, like a lot of the cinematography got like super solid, like really good. And a lot of the stuff that I was shooting was still kind of rough because at some points I was working by myself, and other points like some of the shooters that we have had working weren't necessarily the best, and new equipment and learning how to use that, and just being like, holy shit, their show's so consistent because like they're just on it. And like, you know, maybe if we are like, I'll tell myself at night so that I could sleep better, we're making a better narrative, but our production isn't as good, or there's random audio errors and their stuff never has audio errors, and like all that stuff used to haunt me. So I definitely understand that.
At what point did you kind of like, are you still kind of that person, or was there a point where you were just like, all right, whatever, like let's just not?
I think I'll find myself getting, so like now I just try to focus on one up, like a lot of the conversations that we had behind like how much of my time is devoted towards TL content and how much of my time is devoted towards one up. The conversation became TL is a client of one up, view it that way. And so I try to not let my brain like go too far into like, well, what did, you know, Echo Fox or CLG come out with this week, or like what does Cloud9 stuff look like? Like I need to make sure that Team Liquid stuff looks like that anymore. So like I don't do that at all anymore. All I think about is like, who are the clients that we have? Okay, cool, we have an MLG thing coming up. I'm going to go look at a bunch of COD stuff. Like what haven't they had before? All right, let's execute on that. And then like optimistically you start to, so like MLG Anaheim was a really interesting experience for me, because we were half of the time doing just like capturing and gathering content for the next event, and then the other half of the time we were doing stuff for their social team to cut stuff. So a lot of it was just like, we're going to go out there, do a bunch of stuff, and then we just have to let it go. So that's like a really interesting lesson of like, you can't dictate what's created off of the stuff that you shoot. You just kind of have to like go with it. And so I feel like it's sort of the same relation.
It's kind of just like you're not it's kind of like you don't have this attachment to the footage, like you were saying. It's just like sometimes I'd imagine when you were shooting it or when you were producing it, you're like, okay, it has to come out like this. But it's like, I don't want to say it's a nihilism thing, but that's probably just like the worst word for it. But it's just like, you have to be prepared to let it go. Like you just have to be prepared to just like have little emotional attachment to it, and just like you said, view them as a client, which I'd imagine is a little bit weird considering, you know, following a team around, you kind of feel it's some kind of attachment to them.
Right. And there's definitely a difference. Like, so we were shooting player features at MLG, which is something that I'll be working on this week. And that I felt the same relation to a lot of the team related stuff that I'd done in the past. Whereas like a lot of the other content, which was just like general coverage of the event or like venue tours or little Twitter bits, they obviously weren't as personal because a lot of that stuff had to be safe. It was like, we have to get the shot. We only have one chance. Like, I can't shoot it risky. We have to be set up properly. And, like, that stuff's good. Like, it's good stuff that's, like, in the can. But I remember for the player pieces, the player that I personally grew attachment to was Clayster, because maybe it was because he was the only player that I was there for the full interview of when Michael was interviewing him. But I remember, like, every time their team was about to either win or lose, like, regardless of my wrist injury, I was like, I picked up a camera, I ran over there, I shot super risky, like I normally shoot, like, you know, like if you know camera stuff, like I was shooting at like 1.4 aperture, like slow motion, like not knowing what he's going to do, not knowing what's going to happen. Like if I turn the lens a little bit too much, I completely blow it out of focus. Like, you know, on a dime sort of stuff. And I think there's like a lot of really interesting footage in there. Not necessarily sure if it's usable, right? But it felt like the moments of like Madison Square Garden, or like when I went to go pick up Phoenix with Steve and Steve, or, you know, like Vegas with Team Liquid's team, or the stuff that I did for Rivals. Like it felt like really genuine and like really true to like what my sort of style was.
And at the worst, you like get more confidence about kind of taking that YOLO approach to it, where it's like, okay, well, I'm just gonna go and do it and hope that I can trust in myself to physically make the right calls in terms of just like settings and in terms of instincts and that kind of stuff, like camera angles and, what to actually do. I'd imagine that there's a part of you that you don't overthink it and you just kind of let it happen. And this is something I'm reading about in a lot of a book that I'm reading about, where it's just like you kind of have to let your overthinking or try-harding nature go, and you just have to like trust your body to make the right decisions for you at that moment.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely. I would say that subconsciously, I definitely subscribe to that train of thought.
So kind of moving things to OneUp. This was the embarrassing thing, is I thought OneUp was the old news brand, the OneUp.com or whatever, which was I think got absorbed into Joystick, that got absorbed into whatever. So eventually, when it clicked that it was its own company, I was like, oh, okay, this makes total sense. It makes a lot more sense than I was thinking about it. So like, what was kind of the lead up to you kind of I wouldn't say taking it corporate, but at least kind of making it its own separate entity, with, I guess, with what I understand is, a much larger team.
So let's go back to Worlds, League Worlds last year. Team Liquid doesn't make it into Worlds, so I have nothing to do, right? Like, I'm following the League team. They don't make it in. Everyone goes on vacation. But like C9 still wanted to do content. They didn't have Vital yet, so C9 wanted to do content. And then HTC was like really starting to go all in on esports in a really big way. And so they had liked what we had done with Rebirth, and there was an opportunity to do some stuff with Smash. So we pitched them. I remember the same day, like, I'm talking to Steve and I'm like, hey, like, there's opportunity to do some projects.
Like Liquid Steve, sorry, just for clarity.
Yeah. So I'm talking to Steve Aronstead and I was like, hey, there's some opportunity to do some projects with C9 or with HTC. The HTC thing was a concept that I had, and I had talked to Walter from HTC about it for a minute, and he's like, yeah, well, like, let me know what you want to do. And so he's like, okay, let's like draft proposals. And I had never done that before. So I was like, I don't know what this means. Like, a budget.
Panic.
Like, I remember what budgets were from like film school briefly, but like I didn't take those courses. So like we're putting together a budget, and honestly, it was like a real weird, not proper way to do it. But we like did it, right? And we made it work. And we like send a proposal out to C9, figure out like dates with Jack, and like that was it. And like Seth was gonna go, like, I think 4 or 6 days after that with the team, to like go to the Korea boot camp and then follow them at Worlds. And then like this, and it was like crazy because it was like, holy shit, all right, we just sold the project. And then it was like, okay, let's go pitch to HTC now. Then we pitched the project to HTC, and it was like, holy shit, they want to buy like an episode and then see what happens. Or I think maybe they might have even picked up all 3 at once, or at least 2 of them. But I just remember thinking like, holy crap, that was like way easier than I thought it would be. And I think it was, a lot of it had to do with the reputation that we'd built around a lot of the Team Liquid content that we had done during the year, where it was like, yeah, we can do a lot of things, and we could do a lot of them like relatively decently. And so we executed on those projects, and they turned out really well, or relatively well, I think. And then we just started getting like a bunch of random requests. Like, I remember a lot of people started messaging me like, hey, is there any chance that you could do stuff like outside of TL? Like, we need a video guy for this, and it was always like a weird thing to be like, hey, Steve, is it cool if I leave next weekend to go do this thing? Or like, I can't really do it. Maybe Seth could go do it, but it's super weird. So we were like, hey, what if we build a company that's not related to Team Liquid, that is not Team... I remember in the first concept, it was like, we'll call it Team Liquid Creative. But then it was like, that doesn't make sense because people don't want to hire Team Liquid Creative to do content for Fnatic.
Yeah.
That wouldn't make sense, right? So we were like, we need to build a different brand. It needs to be different. It needs to operate in a different way. Like, it needs to just be completely its own thing, that...
on its own island.
That like Piglet's not going to come and like pick up a camera and start shooting. Right?
That would be very entertaining for the record, but...
Right. So that's kind of how it all started, and we were like, okay, yeah, let's like build towards it being its entirely own company, but it definitely did start off like what we had done at Liquid and like the reception that it had gotten.
So normally when I like people ask me about making it in esports, or at least kind of like getting to a paid point, I usually just tell them that it's like a ladder where like you do something for free on your own, and then you do something for free for some other people, usually in a group project or something. And then from there you usually pitch your first paid work, which is usually terrible. But then you take the fact that someone paid you for your work and then you use it to raise the amount of money or raise the quality of the work that you have, because you're either using the work in order to improve your equipment and then you can have a higher production quality and then you can command more money, or just a logical progression of, okay, I'm going to bigger and bigger places. So that kind of seems like this was the case here, where you started from doing Leaguepedia stuff just because you had a passion for it or because you saw an opportunity there, and then it's just like your quality of work established a reputation that people are coming to you now. You don't have to you don't always have to be pitching and hoping and being like, I'm desperate for this work, please let me do it. Now you kind of have the opportunity to choose.
Yeah, it's so interesting because it's way different than it was in the past, and I can't decipher if it's because what we've done has been so good or because the industry is growing so fast that they need stuff, and we were just lucky to have a decent foresight to think like, hey, we specialize in like narrative pieces about players. Maybe we should build a business model around that. Obviously, it's evolved. We've like done commercials and other stuff that's not that, but it was kind of the first concept that we had when heading into this. But yeah, it was definitely a labor of love to get to this point, right? Like even along the way, like I remember when I was at Azubu, the cameras that we were shooting with weren't as good as I wanted them to be, so I went and took a third of like what I was getting paid over the course of a couple months and invested into more gear so that like roads looked better. And like even while at Liquid, like the budget that we had for video had kind of exhausted, so I invested some of my own personal money. Like I was able to do that because I was like living with the team, so I didn't have very much overhead at the time. But so for me, I was like, oh, it makes sense. Like I'll just invest so that we have better content, so that we have better visuals, so that maybe we have better sound, and like all of that paid off. Like I think one of the obviously I don't know everyone's personal situation. I don't know what everyone's finances are like, right? But I think a lot of what other videographers struggle with, or like a lot of what other creatives struggle with, is like you can make micro adjustments to what you do over a long period of time that will likely require some either like A, financials, B, more of your spare time, or like more reading and learning or watching and learning. And it's like your product will get better and better. Whereas like if the attitude that you have is just like, well, this is what I have, I don't have time to like learn anymore, I don't really want to put any more of my free time in it because I should be making more money, or I should be spending time doing this or that, or playing whatever, like your stuff will never get better. Or maybe it'll get better but at a much slower rate than if you take out time or resources and dedicate them to your craft.
It's kind of like it's very much dependent on the time you put into it, and I think it's a weird thing. Like you were saying, you don't know everyone's financials, and it's very hard to just be like, okay, you just got to push through it, because like that's how certain bad like practices get reinforced, and you're just like, okay, well that's the way it's always been, so you got to do it. However, like I think that there's this point where you're like, no one is going to make your career for you if you're going to do it yourself. If you want yourself and your own product to be at the forefront, if you want to have that kind of control, you have to prove that you are worth those people's money, time, and resources, and like you can't get things handed to you. You have to earn them. So I really think that's something that if you're listening to this, anyone in the audience, and you're kind of wondering like what the secret sauce is towards getting to a place of self-sufficiency, at least, instead of just like doing it as a hobby, a lot of it is just like making do with what you have, and finding ways, if you don't have the money to make it up, to fake it, or to like figure out a way of eventually getting there.
Yeah, definitely in the early Leaguepedia days, like I remember like I got my first camera and I was like, damn, this is like $400 or $500. Like that's so expensive, I'll never be able to buy anything again.
how
like,
naive you were.
Right. And then as time went on, like a month or two into it, I was like, oh, this isn't good enough. Like, I have like extra random shit that I don't use. I could sell that. And like I sold that stuff and I was like, okay, cool. I have like halfway to like a decent lens now. And like I like put in extra hours at work. And then like the next month I bought a like way more, like it was like a baller lens in comparison. Like it was a lens that cost the amount that my camera cost when I bought it. So it's like, holy shit, like we're there.
We're rolling
making
now.
It, right?
We're rolling.
And it was like a lot of little increments like that on like either the equipment list or I don't know how many nights. Like, and this is probably the most important thing. Like equipment aside, like I could probably go take a phone and create an interesting narrative just obviously off of a HTC 10 that I still haven't received. No, I'm just kidding. Obviously off of like any phone, you could go out, shoot something really interesting, create a narrative, right? You don't need to have really good equipment. But one of the most important things that I've learned is that the thing that I was able to do that I don't think a lot of other people spend time doing is I literally like spend so much time, or at least in the past, I haven't had so much time recently, but I have spent so much time just like watching people on YouTube talk about like best like way to set up your camera.
Tutorials,
like,
man. There's tons of free information out there.
Like best ways to do this in-camera effect, like interesting ways to manipulate light. Like I remember I saw this video where this dude was like, you could shine a light into your lens and it creates this, you know, lens flare effect and blah blah. And if you put like a string across it and like shine it, it'll like create those like J.J. Abrams anamorphic flares. And it was just like I went out and I tried it and like they all look like shit because I wasn't doing it correctly. But like I remember the action of trying it on a couple different things and like shooting it is like, okay, I got the shots that I needed. Maybe I'll shoot one interesting. And like it just didn't work out at the time. But then you fast forward to like a year and a half later, we're at MLG and we did those same exact effects on our hero shots for it. And it was like, I would have not known how to do some of that stuff. Granted that it was our DP that brought it up, but it was still like, oh, I've done this before. Like I know how to do it. Like all these little things started triggering in my mind. Like, oh, like I didn't know how to do this before I watched this video, or I didn't know how to do that before I read this thing online. Or, you know, like I took some random course at my community college that seemed like it might fit something that could help me. And it was like how to shoot for like broadcast news or like how to shoot. It was like journalism, video journalism, which I was like, I was never going to be a journalist myself or anything, but I was like, oh, maybe I'll learn stuff about like how to ask questions, which like kind of relates to what I was doing. And like while I was taking that course, the most important lesson, and I tell this to like everyone that I shoot with, my teacher was like, okay, look, like if you want to do a panning shot, and it's super simple, if you want to do a panning shot that goes from the river over to the building, how long are you going to hold on the river? And in my head, I was like 3 seconds. And then he's like, and then how long are you going to hold on the house or the building? And then in my head, I was like 3 or 4 seconds. And he's like telling us, and he's like, so you hold on the river for 10 seconds. And I was like, what the fuck? That's so long. I would never use that. And he's like, and then you hold on the building for 10 seconds. And then if you want to go back to the river, you hold on it for 10 seconds again. And then I was like, why? Like, why am I shooting so much? So I was like, I don't know if this is like 100% true, right? So that next week when I went out to shoot LCS, I tried and I applied that same sort of theory. Where I was like, all right, I'm going to hold on this player for 10 seconds because it's just a single shot. And I was like, way too long. Like, the entire time that I was doing it, I was like, holy shit, this is way too long. But then I took it into my editor and I started cutting it down. And I was like, oh my God, like if I wouldn't have waited an extra 10 seconds or like an extra 3 or 4 seconds here, I wouldn't have gotten that reaction on his face. Or like my first 3 seconds of this 10-second clip is me trying to like stabilize my shot. So if I would have only waited for 5, then I would like the whole thing would have been unusable.
So it's patience. It's learning patience.
Right. And so like little lessons like that from like a course that like in theory could have nothing to do with what I was doing at the time, but like loosely kind of fit. And it's just all in the same vein of like a lot of it has to I will forever preach that I went to film school, but I left halfway through. And so, like, for me, like, the reason that I know what to do is not because I had a quarter or half of an education. It's because I've just spent a lot of time learning, but learning from sources that aren't traditional. Like, yes, that class was in a college, but it was a one-off course. It wasn't like something that I was doing to get towards a goal. It was just like, hey, I might have some free time during the summer, so I'm going to take this thing because I could learn something from it. So it's like, it's like constantly learning and evolving and applying things that you're learning into what you're doing.
So like if I'm hypothetically looking to do some video work and I'm just like starting out, like I always try to like relate this kind of stuff to newbies, because like if we're listening to like what you're saying right now, that's kind of stuff can sound really intimidating. It's like you have to learn all these fundamentals, and then you have to invest in some very expensive equipment, and then you're trying to get access to stuff that you may not have the chops or like the connections in order to get. Like, how do you relate that to someone who is just kind of starting out, that is looking and hearing all this stuff and thinking, oh man, I just don't have it in me to kind of like do all this stuff?
So when I first started shooting content, like first ever attempting to generate content, I was doing this blog with a bunch of my friends we were not writers, so it was like horrible grammar, horrible spelling, but we had like a passion to do tech stuff. So we had this blog, and it was called Noble Press, and we just like did all this. We used to go to all these different conventions and like interview a bunch of different people, but we were interviewing people on an iPhone. So we would like set up a tripod, put an iPhone on the tripod, and like I think we had invested like $30 on like a hand mic that plugged into the iPod. Like, I want to even say that one of the events we used a Rock Band like microphone, and like it sounded like shit, but it was like a good foot in the door for like the knowledge behind
you gotta learn
what it takes to like walk up to someone and ask them for an interview, to like be fearless about that, like to not be nervous when you're like setting up your stuff and people are waiting on you. And like there were so many little steps like that where it's like I didn't just like walk into the room and I was like, hey, I want to start doing esports content, give me a red and $20,000 worth of lenses, and I'm gonna need like 3 assistants. Like, I started creating content on an iPhone.
And to be honest, I think that if you aren't going to try that, or if you aren't willing to at least, if you aren't willing to take that leap and saying, okay, well, I'm going to start on an iPhone, but at least I'm going to be like learning towards getting that bigger stuff, that this might not be the thing for you.
Right. No, definitely. And even like MLG was a really good learning experience of this, and just kind of some of the other stuff that I've worked on in the last year. Like, not everything has to be like big and crazy and super high production value. Like, there is still value off of, like, if you're someone that's really good at just capturing moments, or really good at like talking to people and like relating to them, like, teams always need people that know how to do social media, right? And if you're personable and you know how to do it right, like, that's so valuable. Like, just little moments on Snapchat, or that's, I assume, a lot of what you've been doing, right?
That's
for like BTS.
Yeah, pretty much. Like, that's what I've been actually, like, I was gonna say, that's what I think the beauty of Snapchat is that you can't import anything besides
what you capture.
Well, what you capture with your phone using the Snapchat client. So it's like you're not gonna be able to use, do the thing where you're editing a video in Premiere and then bringing it into Snapchat and have it be 100% polished or whatever. You are literally relying on your fundamentals that has nothing to do with your technology except for your phone's camera. Like, I was using a Nexus 5 up until like 2 days ago when I got a better phone, but it's like, even then you are, you have to pay attention to the wind, and you have to pay attention to like how the sun is shining in the lens and that kind of stuff. And it's like, it removes the intimidating factor of, I need to have like a GoPro that can do like 4K or 90 FPS or something like that. It's just like you are focusing straight on not the technology part of it. You need to just like learn how to tell stories in a very kind of confined environment, and that makes you focus on the fundamentals. So maybe we're just talking to the people there where it's like, just start. That's what I always tell people. The same thing in the same exact vein. I just say, hey, if you want to start writing, if you want to start writing about esports, like, Medium and Tumblr are free. Like, just go create a thing and just start writing. It doesn't matter that you are, audience is or how well it's received or whatever. It's more importantly that you're trying and you are learning. And I always say that the best, like, starting out is almost the best time to experiment with things, because no one's going to care. No one knows who you are. No one has any expectations of you, or like no one's going to care if you mess up. So just like take a project and be like, okay, this weekend I want to learn how to do X, and then just do it. And if it's garbage, then you work on it and try to make it better. But at least you're taking time to better yourself and your crafts in an environment that's extremely forgiving.
Yes, I agree with all of that.
Damian, I think it's about time to wrap this up. Where can people find you on the internet?
So my Twitter is at Damian Estrada. My YouTube, wait, no, that one's not very good. One Up's YouTube is actually, I don't know if we have a URL yet, so I don't have anything for that. I would just say my Twitter is probably the best place. You could find me at my Twitter at Damian Estrada.
Cool, no problem. I'll probably do a bunch of linking to the One Up stuff in the show notes and all that kind of stuff. Thank you guys so much for checking out Sessions this week. I had a fun time with this episode. We will be back next week with another episode. I'm going to be in Los Angeles at the Beyond the Summit International hub doing social media for them. So if you're into Dota 2, you might see me on Beyond the Summit's video/social media for the next week. We will be back, like I said, next Thursday with another episode. If you guys haven't already, you can check us out on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. You can check out all the ways to subscribe to us on sessionscast.com/subscribe. We also have all the show notes and archival posts on sessionscast.com. Thanks for listening. I hope you guys have a good night.
See ya.